Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a radical theory that didn't just question economics, it pretty much broke it. We're going to uncover how one idea from the 1970s totally blew up the consensus. And get this, its aftershocks are still shaping just about every single debate we have about government policy today.
Okay, let's just kick things off with this bombshell from economist Robert Lucas. In 1981, he wasn't just pointing out a few little cracks in the system. No, he was basically shouting from the rooftops that the dominant economic ideas of his time were giving all the wrong answers, that they were fundamentally broken.
So this crisis, this feeling that the old maps just didn't work anymore, created this huge opening for a new, and yeah, a deeply controversial idea. And it all kicked off with this one big puzzle, but nobody, and I mean nobody, could figure out. That mystery had a name that sounds just as weird and painful as it was: stagflation. And honestly, it was like a monster that shouldn't even exist. See, for decades, everyone just knew there was a trade-off. You could have high inflation, or you could have high unemployment. You got one, or you got the other. Simple, right? But then boom, suddenly countries were getting hit with the absolute worst of both worlds: a stagnant economy with people out of work and prices going through the roof. So you can imagine this created a total intellectual vacuum. The two big theories, the heavyweights, Keynesianism and monetarism, they were completely stumped. As you can see here, one could kind of explain one part of the problem, and the other could explain the other part, but neither could explain the whole thing. It was a baffling mystery. Okay, so when your best ideas fail that spectacularly, you don't just need a new policy. You need a whole new way of thinking. And that crisis, well, it set the stage for a new group of thinkers, with a framework that was honestly nothing short of revolutionary. And leading the charge was this economist, Robert Lucas. His argument was basically, look, we can't just patch up these old models. We have to tear it all down and rebuild macroeconomics from scratch. And that meant starting with some totally different and, yeah, pretty extreme assumptions about how we all behave. Their whole theory, the entire thing, rested on these three big, interconnected ideas. Each one, on its own, was a huge shot at the old way of thinking. But when you put them all together, whoa, the conclusion was just going to blow people's minds. All right, so let's dig into these three core ideas one by one, because this is really the heart of their whole revolution. First up, rational expectations. This is the big one. The basic idea here is that people aren't dumb. We're smart, we're forward-looking, we don't just drive by looking in the rearview mirror, right? We use all the info we have to figure out what's coming next, and that includes what we think the government is up to. And here's the kicker, we learn. You can't keep fooling people with the same old tricks. Okay, idea number two. Continuous market clearing. Now, this one's a bit of a throwback to old-school economics. It basically assumes markets are perfect. Prices, wages, they all adjust instantly to keep everything in balance. And this leads to a pretty wild conclusion, that all unemployment is basically voluntary. Because if there are unemployed people, wages should just instantly fall until it's cheap enough for companies to hire them. So in this model, the only reason you'd be unemployed is if you choose not to work for that new, lower wage. And that brings us to number three, the Lucas surprise supply curve. This is the idea that ties it all together. It says the only way the government can actually create a boom is to surprise people. So imagine you own a factory. You see the price of your stuff go up. You think, awesome, demand is up, and you start making more. But what if it's just general inflation and everything is getting more expensive? Well, you've been tricked. As soon as you realize that, you cut back, and poof, the boom is gone. Okay, so you take these three big ideas, right? Rational people, perfect markets, and the fact that you need a surprise to get anything done. You mix them all together, and what you get is a really shocking conclusion about how powerful the government actually is. Or maybe how powerless it is. And here it is, the big punchline. If people are rational, you can't systematically surprise them. Any policy that's predictable, that people can see coming, well, they'll just adjust for it ahead of time. And in doing so, they completely cancel out its effect. And check this out. Here's exactly how it works. So the central bank says, hey, we're going to pump money into the economy to create a boom. But people are rational, remember? So they hear that and think, uh-oh, that's just going to cause inflation. So what do? Workers immediately demand higher wages. Businesses immediately raise their prices before the policy even kicks in. So by the time the government acts, it's too late. All you get is higher prices, just like everyone expected, and zero real boost to the economy. The policy was dead on arrival. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that's a pretty airtight theory. But as a complete picture of how the economy works, well, it didn't exactly stick the landing. Turns out, the real world is just messy.
Yeah, the biggest problem for the theory was, well, reality. I mean, you have these deep, painful recessions like the one in the early 80s that just drag on. And you got to ask, can a downturn that lasts for years really just be because people were surprised for that long? It doesn't really add up.
And of course, critics pounced on this. They pointed out that, hey, in the real world, prices and wages are sticky. They don't just change on a dime, you know? You have contracts, it takes time. And that whole idea of perfect markets, it seems great in a textbook, but not so much in the real world. Plus, when you actually looked for hard data to back up some of the theory's big claims, it was pretty weak. But here's the crazy thing. Even though the theory itself kind of faded away, the revolution it started, it totally succeeded. Its main ideas, especially rational expectations, were so powerful that basically everyone started using them, even the economists who disagreed with the new classical conclusions. It just forced the entire field to get serious about what people expect is going to happen. Fast forward to 2003, and Robert Lucas himself is looking back on all this, and he argued that all those intellectual battles from the 70s and 80s, they actually led to a way better, more sophisticated understanding of the economy. So much so that he famously declared that the central problem of preventing depressions had, for all practical purposes, been solved. So, what's the bottom line here? The new classical school itself might be history, but its ghost is still haunting every single debate we have about economic policy. It left us with this really tough, uncomfortable question. How much control does the government really have? It made everyone face this idea that there are real limits to what policy can do when you're dealing with smart people who are trying to figure out your next move. And that challenge, that fundamental question, is still right at the heart of economics today.